A former GM insider just broke his silence, and what he revealed could change the way you look at every engine on the road. For years, drivers complained about strange breakdowns, quiet buybacks, and engines failing far too soon. Most of those voices were ignored. Now, an ex-employee from GM's powertrain division has stepped forward with internal documents that paint a very different picture. According to him, these failures weren't accidents. They were designed. He claims GM knowingly approved a flawed V8 engine to cut production costs. Lifter components weren't properly hardened. Cam lobes wore out at shockingly low mileage. Oil passages were narrowed to save machining time, even though engineers warned it would cause dangerous oil starvation. In private meetings, internal teams admitted the engine couldn't handle real-world heat or stress cycles. Leadership approved it anyway. The goal was simple: hit profit targets now and deal with the fallout later. While GM marketed this V8 as one of its most reliable ever, the truth was buried in internal reports describing severe durability risks and a high chance of catastrophic failure. Engineers allegedly referred to the platform as a time bomb, predicting that many engines would collapse just after warranties expired. Outside the company, mechanics began to notice a disturbing pattern. Engines were failing in identical ways: collapsed lifters, destroyed camshafts, sudden shutdowns with minimal mileage. What appeared to be isolated cases turned into a consistent, nationwide pattern. Online forums lit up. Technicians compared stories. Something was clearly wrong. As complaints mounted, GM didn't recall the engines or redesign the parts. Instead, it quietly introduced thicker oil recommendations, updated manuals, and trained service advisors to blame poor maintenance, even when owners had perfect records. The thicker oil didn't fix the problem. It only delayed the failure. Behind closed doors, panic grew. Emails circulated. Reports were rewritten. Warnings that once filled internal documents were slowly erased or softened. Yet production continued. The same engines stayed on the road, and customers were kept in the dark. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. According to the whistleblower, it was a calculated business decision, one that put profits over people and left thousands of drivers unknowingly riding on ticking time bombs. And now that the truth has surfaced, one question remains: how far will the fallout really go? GM didn't fix the problem, it covered it up. And hundreds of thousands of drivers paid the price. GM finally acknowledged the growing engine failures. But instead of truly fixing the defect, the company made a quiet, calculated move to protect itself. Rather than redesigning faulty components, GM simply changed the recommended oil for its V8 engines. Owners were instructed to switch from thin synthetic oil to a much thicker blend, told it would improve durability. Behind closed doors, the real reason was far more troubling. The thicker oil didn't solve the problem, it delayed it. It masked early signs of lifter collapse and camshaft damage just long enough to push many vehicles past their warranty limits. GM wasn't fixing engines. It was buying time. Drivers felt the impact immediately. Fuel efficiency dropped. Performance suffered. Trucks felt heavier and sluggish. Owners who purchased these vehicles for power and efficiency suddenly faced rising costs and declining reliability. Inside GM's corporate offices, however, executives were relieved. Warranty claims decreased. Accountability was delayed. The burden quietly shifted to customers who had trusted the brand. Then came the warranty trap. Although GM advertised a 5-year, 60,000-mile warranty, the fine print told another story. Dealerships were ordered to demand flawless maintenance records. One missing receipt, one minor error, or one oil change done outside an approved shop could result in an instant denial. Thousands of owners learned this the hard way. Families were left with repair bills in the thousands. Small business owners lost transportation and income. Some were forced to take out loans to repair vehicles that should have been covered. Even dealership technicians admitted, quietly, that they often knew a claim would be rejected before the engine was ever examined. What should have been a safety net became a financial gatekeeper designed to protect GM, not its customers. But drivers didn't stay silent. As failures mounted, individual complaints turned into a national legal reckoning. Lawyers began comparing cases and discovered identical patterns across the country. Class action lawsuits formed in multiple states. Under legal pressure, GM was forced to release internal emails and documents, and what emerged was shocking. GM had known about the defects long before the public ever did. Internal conversations showed executives weighing the cost of disclosure versus the risk of staying silent. Safety questions were replaced by profit calculations. Regulators launched investigations. Some even questioned whether criminal charges were justified. The truth was finally undeniable. These failures weren't accidents. They were the result of deliberate corporate choices. Then came the shockwave, an $888 million settlement. GM presented it as responsibility. Analysts saw it as the beginning of a larger storm. The settlement covered only part of the damage. Experts predicted total costs could climb past $2 billion once all lawsuits and fines were added. Investors panicked. GM's stock dropped. Consumer trust collapsed. Watchdog groups labeled GM's V8 engines among the least reliable of the decade. Customers backed out of deals. Even models unrelated to the scandal were avoided. Inside GM, leaders spoke of recovery, but leaked meetings revealed deep fear of permanent reputational damage. And competitors were ready. Ford, Ram, and Toyota moved fast, carefully framing their marketing around reliability, transparency, and long-term performance. They didn't need to mention GM by name. Customers understood the message. Fleet operators, once loyal to GM, switched brands almost overnight. General Motors wasn't just losing sales, it was watching its entire legacy collapse in real time. Even GM's own engineers began walking away, joining rivals that offered stability and integrity. Used GM trucks flooded the market, yet buyers refused them unless prices were slashed to desperation levels. GM wasn't just losing vehicles, it was losing trust, credibility, and ground it might never reclaim. And as competitors circled, another threat locked its sights on the company. Washington. The regulatory reckoning hit with force. Once congressional committees grasped the scale of deception, they moved fast to make an example of GM. Executives were summoned to nationally televised hearings, forced to answer for years of silence and thousands of families buried in staggering repair bills. Senators slammed internal emails and engineering reports on the table, documents that directly contradicted GM's public claims. Federal investigators launched formal inquiries into disclosure violations, safety misrepresentation, and warranty manipulation. International agencies joined in, questioning whether the same tactics were used outside the U.S. What GM hoped to isolate domestically became a global legal storm. Talk of criminal liability spread. Even the suggestion signaled how severe the situation had become. Once a pillar of American industry, GM's reputation crumbled live on television. Lawmakers rushed through stricter disclosure rules and faster defect reporting timelines, changes that reshaped the entire auto industry. But the most powerful shift wasn't political. It came from everyday Americans. The consumer awakening. For decades, buyers trusted major auto brands to fix problems, honor warranties, and protect them. The GM scandal shattered that belief. Online communities turned into digital watchdog networks. Owners, mechanics, and independent reviewers exposed patterns of failure in real time. Shoppers no longer researched horsepower and price alone. They studied recall histories, legal records, and warranty denials. Forums built shared databases of flawed models and corporate responses. Buyers learned to spot red flags, uncover design weaknesses, and calculate long-term ownership costs. Brand loyalty collapsed almost overnight. Families that had driven GM for generations turned away. Some switched to Toyota or Ram. Others refused to support any company that lacked transparency. Ethics became as important as performance. Trust, once broken, proved nearly impossible to restore. And this awakening didn't just change attitudes. It triggered a financial disaster. The financial avalanche. GM never saw it coming. Legal fees, penalties, settlements, and recalls drained billions from funds meant for innovation. Analysts warned total costs would stretch far beyond initial projections. The stock plunged as confidence vanished. Reports revealed shrinking revenues and swelling liabilities. Dealers struggled to move inventory linked to defective engines. Some neared collapse under unsold stock. Credit agencies downgraded GM, raising borrowing costs and strangling funding for electric vehicle development. A flawed engine design, meant to save fuel by deactivating cylinders, became a ticking time bomb, relying on perfect oil pressure and flawless timing. The avalanche grew, draining resources and shattering the foundation of an American icon. And just when stability was needed most, another crisis hit. The layoffs. The collapse didn't begin with numbers. It began with workers carrying cardboard boxes out of factories. Detroit's Factory Zero, once hailed as the future of electric manufacturing, dropped from 2 shifts to 1. Over 1,000 workers were transitioned, a corporate word for unemployment. Ultium battery plants in Ohio and Tennessee stalled, leaving skilled workers trapped in uncertainty. These were the jobs GM promised would launch a new era. Instead, the plants became symbols of broken commitments. White-collar teams suffered too. Entire departments vanished. The Georgia IT Center shut down. Union halls filled with anger as livelihoods disappeared. Communities trembled. But layoffs were only the symptom. The real disease was deeper. GM's EV dreams in ruins. GM's all-electric future, once marketed as inevitable, unraveled. Adoption slowed as consumers worried about range, charging access, and battery life. The loss of federal tax credits crushed demand. Inflation made EVs feel unreachable to average households. GM had built its entire strategy on incentives that vanished too quickly. Then came the brutal $1.6 billion write-down, a clear signal of retreat. Rivian and Volkswagen struggled too, but no company had bet its identity so publicly on electrification. Factories sat idle. Battery partnerships were reconsidered. Inside executive meetings, frustration replaced confidence. GM wasn't adjusting a plan, it was trying to survive its own gamble. And when investors saw the numbers, fear turned into panic. The investor collapse. Wall Street moved fast. Institutions dumped shares. Analysts questioned leadership. Pension funds tied to GM stability faced dark conversations with retirees. Everyday Americans felt the tremors through their mutual funds and retirement accounts. The market began searching for a new automotive leader, and increasingly, GM was not in the conversation. Once respect turned to doubt. Then doubt hardened into fear. Now, only one question remained. Can GM survive? With scandals, losses, betrayal of trust, and internal division, GM stood at a crossroads. The damage went far beyond defective engines or failed strategies. It was cultural. Engineers questioned leadership. Managers battled for control. Loyal customers turned into critics. GM, once an American symbol, became a warning. Parents who raised their families on Chevrolet no longer recommended the brand. That emotional bond, forged over generations, was dissolving. Rebuilding would take more than fixes or promises. It would require transparency, humility, and culture-level change. GM would have to prove, beyond words, that safety, honesty, and long-term thinking truly mattered again. But in a ruthless market, with smarter rivals, skeptical consumers, and regulators watching every move, GM's fate now rests in the hands of millions of Americans asking one final question. Does this company deserve a second chance? This was just the beginning. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up. Digital Garage has so much more in store.